Good evening. I'm Haylee Ficuciello. Politics is often compared to theater. There are actors, scripts, dramatic speeches, carefully staged press conferences, and of course, plenty of people trying desperately to convince the audience they are heroes. But every once in a while, the curtain slips. And when it comes to New Jersey Governor Mikie Sherrill and the ongoing controversy surrounding Delaney Hall in Newark, the curtain didn't just slip, it came crashing down. Last Friday afternoon, Governor Sherrill announced that New Jersey state troopers would be deployed alongside Newark police officers to establish designated protest areas near Delaney Hall, the federal immigration detention facility that became the center of weeks of demonstration, political grandstanding, and media attention. Now, at first glance, some people might say, well, that's leadership. Really? Because I have one simple question. Where was the leadership 2 weeks ago? Where was the concern about public safety when political allies and activists were turning Delaney Hall into the latest national political stage? Where was the urgency when tensions were escalating day after day? And perhaps most importantly, why is Governor Sherrill suddenly willing to use law enforcement resources now after spending days appearing sympathetic to rhetoric that criticized federal immigration enforcement efforts? Because from where many New Jersey residents are sitting, this looks less like leadership and more like a panic management. For nearly 2 weeks, the political narrative surrounding Delaney Hall focused on accusations, outrage, and dramatic claims about conditions inside the facility. Democratic politicians lined up for press conferences, activists held demonstration, national media arrived, social media exploded. Everybody wanted a microphone, everybody wanted a camera, everybody wanted to be seen, but remarkably, few people seemed interested in lowering the temperature. Instead, the temperature kept rising. Then suddenly, after tensions intensified and public safety concerns grew, Governor Sherrill discovered that police officers might actually be useful. Imagine that. The same government official who often spent months criticizing law enforcement suddenly realized that maintaining order requires law enforcement. What a groundbreaking discovery. And here's where the story becomes even more interesting. Because once the demonstrations began attracting outside agitators and tensions escalated further, reality started interfering with political narratives. I visited Delaney Hall on Saturday. What I saw was not the carefully crafted image many activists were hoping to be presented. What I observed was New Jersey State Police, Newark PD, and other surrounding city officers working to maintain order while keeping opposing groups separated. The people standing between chaos and public disorder weren't politicians. They weren't activists. They weren't social media influencers. They were law enforcement officers, the very people who frequently become targets of criticism whenever enforcement law politically is inconvenient. And here's another uncomfortable reality. Reports emerged that some individuals involved in the demonstration had traveled far from outside of New Jersey. Some weren't local residents, some weren't direct connected to detainees, some appeared far more interested in confrontation than solution. Again, if accurate, what exactly does that accomplish? How does creating conflict outside a federal detention facility improve conditions for detainees? How does attacking police officers help immigrant families? How does turning Newark into a political battleground solve anything? The answer is simple. It doesn't. Because for some activists, the goal was never solving the problem. The goal was creating headlines. And unfortunately, some politicians appeared more interested in headlines than outcomes. That's why Governor Sherrill suddenly embraced a strong law enforcement presence feels so revealing. Because if deploying officers to establish order was the correct decision last Friday, then why wasn't it the correct decision weeks earlier? If public safety mattered today, didn't it matter then? If keeping protesters and counter-protesters separate is important now, wasn't it important from the beginning? These are not complicated questions, yet somehow they remained unanswered. And perhaps the most frustrating part of all of this is that New Jersey taxpayers are once again left paying the price for political theater. State police resource, local police resource, additional security costs, operational disruptions, all because elected officials spent days fueling political conflict before eventually recognizing that public order still matters. That's not leadership. That's damage control. And here's the broader lesson. Immigration policies is a serious issue. Border security is a serious issue. Detention standards are a serious issue. These topics deserve honest debate. These deserve facts. They deserve transparency. What they don't deserve is politicians treating every controversy like a campaign event, because eventually reality catches up. Eventually, public safety becomes unavoidable. Eventually, somebody has to maintain order. And when that moment arrives, it usually isn't the politicians standing on the stage who solve the problem. It's the officers standing on the street. As we approach 2 weeks since the controversy began, one conclusion becomes difficult to ignore. Much of these escalation appears entirely preventable. Had political leaders focused on de-escalating instead of dramatizing, tensions may have never reached that point. Had public officials prioritized order before outrage, New Jersey might have avoided much of the chaos. Instead, residents watched another familiar performance. Politicians gave speeches, activists demanded attention, cable news cameras rolled, then law enforcement was called in to clean up the mess. Again. And that brings us back to Governor Mikie Sherrill, because after all the speeches, all the press conferences, all the political posturing, she ultimately arrived at the same conclusion many New Jersey residents reached from the beginning. Public order matters, law enforcement matters, and political theater has consequences. The question voters should ask themselves is simple. If this was the solution all along, why did it take nearly 2 weeks to get there? I'm Haylee Ficuciello, and that's my commentary. Good night.